your work and what you do?
So my name is Valencia Huta Barat. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Bikin Ruang Bersama. It's a co-working space in Jakarta. We're focusing on social innovations and engaging with the community workings on the arts, culture, and social movement. Um, at this moment, our space is closed due to the social distancing restriction, and we're still waiting. It's not clear yet when we are about to open. But yeah, I'm hopeful. I didn't fill in the poll, but I can say that I'm hopeful. There has been a lot of changes, like immediate changes that we can share later. But I just want to say that thank you very much for inviting me, becoming a part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to share and learn from the rest of the speakers and the participants. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Valencia. And now we can maybe continue with our second speaker, Natalia. Natalia, could you share a little bit about yourself and your hubs?
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. My name is Natalia Palombo. I'm the Managing Director of Many Studios in Scotland, in the UK. We work with people in three ways at Many Studios. We operate a creative hub with over 60 members who work from the building day to day. We hire a venue out for events, and we do consultancy across the world. Our consultancy focuses on sustainable creative business models and creative networks. Yeah, like most people, we were affected instantly by the pandemic. The first community transmitted cases in the UK were detected on the 11th of March. And by the end of March, all of our event hires were cancelled. All of our consultancy for the year had been postponed. So that was the three income streams that were instantly impacted. The third and final area of income for Many Studios is our creative hub, and it became clear very quickly that it was not going to be safe for us to encourage our studio members to work from the building. So I've been at home for 9 weeks, and missing our community very much. It's quite a difficult to give you a little background in the organisation, we're a very small team with a very ambitious output. We have a lot of strands to the organisation in terms of public programming. So Many Studios as a volunteer directorship. We were all working our own full-time practices for many years while we built the organisation. And in 2015, we refurbished a 10,000 square foot building in the east end of the city, and that shift changed our model considerably. So I became a full-time managing director, refocusing all my existing projects into the organisation, while Becca and Mark, who are the two other directors, the founding directors at Many Studios, remained in a voluntary position supporting my role. So we have a lot going on in a very small team. So this negotiation of the crisis has been a difficult one, and I think that's the case for a lot of organisations and hubs in everywhere around the world. A lot of time, the first 3 weeks were probably the busiest weeks I can remember in terms of working. And the first 3 weeks were mainly spent doing two things: fundraising primarily, and talking, a lot of talking. So it's been a really great period of time in terms of reconnecting with peers and sort of re-engaging with a lot of networks, both formal and informal, and realizing the importance of having those connections in terms of finding solutions together. So it's definitely been something that we hope we continue to do as a global community, is to keep connected and to keep talking to one another, because there's a lot still to figure out. So I think as far as I can see it, there's two main challenges, and we kind of imagine being in sort of two phases. The first phase is definitely about responding very instantly to the impact, and I guess responding to a lockdown, responding to not being able to host our communities physically in our buildings. And then I think a really long period of rebuilding, and that's definitely the phase that we're starting to prepare for now. And these conversations, I think, are again going to be very important in us finding new ways of working and living perhaps with the virus for a while, and figuring out what that means for our physical workspaces, essentially. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to you all. And working with our where we can help each other.
Great, thank you so much, Natalia, and for also kind of laying down some of the conversations that we'll be having very soon. And next, last but definitely not least, we have Stephanie Key. Stephanie, would you be able to introduce yourself and a little bit about your work?
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Penang, Malaysia. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. This is really the first cross-regional conversation that we've been a part of, so I'm very excited to be part of this. So Penang Art District, we're a creative hub in this little small island town in Malaysia. And our role is really as an agency to support the arts community of artists, collectives, artisans, art educators and spaces in Penang. We don't run a physical space just yet, but we support the community by providing programs and really connecting them with each other and also connecting them to resources that we have locally and internationally. In the past couple of weeks, that's essentially what our role has been, to be a connector, bridging the community with our local government and also to other international organizations that have really stepped up to support the arts and culture sector during this difficult time. And I like to echo what Natalia said. There's been a lot of conversations and talking in the past couple of weeks, and it's also been the busiest that I can remember as well. So yeah, I'm really excited I'm looking forward to the discussion that we'll be having today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. And now that we have introduced all of our panelists, we can get right into some of the questions that we have around the Creative Hub's short-term responses. So once again, I would like to remind that participants can actually start writing their questions in the chat box. And for the newcomers, if you would be able to please mute and turn off your videos throughout the whole conversation so that it does not distract the whole session and the conversation that we're going to be having with the other panel speakers. So I'd like to ask the panelists to perhaps turn on your videos and and unmute yourselves. So can we have Natalia and Stephanie and Valencia back on our screens? All right. Okay. So now that we have everybody here now, let's start. We've got a lot of questions that we'd like to ask you guys. And I think it's quite interesting also to hear the introductions that each of you had said before. I think during this pandemic, a lot of the situation for the hubs is it's a really challenging time, and it's a really good opportunity for us as well to kind of learn from each other. So if could we perhaps maybe hear some examples from each of you about how your hubs or how other hubs that you work with have responded in a maybe more positive way to the crisis? Maybe we can start with Valencia.
Okay, thank you, Kami. So yeah, as has been laid down before by Natalia, and we have to switch very quick when the pandemic hit Indonesia. So we before our space, because it's a meeting space, so it's a lot of our work, operational work concentrated on the offline work, which means like if we have a meeting, we would invite people to come, or we would go to their office, just to show like that we wanted to see each other, want to support each other. But then as soon as we have to close down due to the social distancing restriction imposed by our government, it was the first thought that we had, okay, how do we move forward? Because we cannot just stop because the physical space stop or close down. So then, of course, the immediate thought is like a going online. But it's been very challenging for us in the first month because we are not very online people. I myself not digital native, so suddenly when you switch online, you have to learn about a lot of new apps, including Zoom and now Microsoft Teams and and other like communication and management tools to be able to keep your team going. But what we feel in the beginning is like we wanted to let everybody knows that it's that it's okay that we are facing this transition, because my team, for example, our team in Kekini, again, we are a very offline team. A lot of the work is done, when talking face to face, because we meet each other every day. So it's been also quite a challenge for them to just communicate online. So the first challenge that we face is like how to keep operationing during this time, using all these applications, using all these digital instruments. Second is because we don't have any income generation because we closed down, and all of our mostly of our main income coming from that. So we look again at the whatever savings that we have, and then we've been very open to our team and saying like, look, this is our condition, like how would you like to respond to it? This is what we offer, and I guess Kekini is very lucky in this sense, because our team is quite understanding so far. And the other thing that we try to shift is like we try to make everybody working part-time. Because there's just no sense to work full time. But also working part time has its own challenge, because before you just you go to the office at 9 and you go home at 5, and now you have to discipline yourself to manage yourself, and that's also not easy. So we've been trying to find ways to be very kind to ourselves as well. So creating an immediate support system. So that's one. The second thing that we face is like what happened to our programs, because a lot of our programs are also offline. We enjoy connecting people. We enjoy creating collaborations that happens on offline on our mostly on our space. So we started to go online, but again, we are trying to figure out how we can make this work. So one thing that I learned from a lot of the community movement that is very useful right now is actually learning from the open source movement. So with the open source movement, we shift our gear, we shift our programs, but then we want everybody to have that mentality that this is, it should be a constructive work. So if people have ideas, let's build on it and let's talk about it. Like if you want to move forward with that idea, then let's construct together instead of like somebody deciding to do things. And it has been working so far. And we also look at like what can we do during this pandemic, like what kind of response that we can have. So we ended up actually talking about the things that we have been talking before as a space, which is imagining a new future or a new Indonesia, if you like. What do we imagine, like what are the things that we think we need to have as a society, as a community, to move forward, to face not just the emergency response during the pandemic, but also how to live our life after that, because things change very quickly. So we we are doing now several programs. One is we do what we call the community talk. It's called Obrolan Warga in Indonesia. It's a series of talk that is offering ways of thinking, alternative ways of thinking that you might hear in the development world a lot, but you don't really hear it outside of the development world. So we want to bring those thinking that is relevant for people out there. We think it's relevant for people out there. And especially for citizens who wanted to be part of the change or who want to make change themselves. So this Obrolan Warga is a series of discussions. It's 10 series of discussions. We invited like experts and people who are been practicing these issues for a long time. So the idea is to bring voice of reasons, because when the pandemic hit hard and there has been everybody moved online, there has been so many noise, everything is online, you know, both the reality and the hoaxes, like they go side by side. So we sort of like kind of have to decide where do we want to be in this, you know, online jungle. So we decided that we wanted to be a voice of reason, and that voice of reason came out from this citizen discussion, which we will conclude with ideation that we can offer to talk about citizen resilience. So we can offer to the citizens, communities, or even policymakers. The second one is we wanted to know how everybody's doing. So there are two programs that we created together with our partners. So a lot of our programs are now collaborated with other partners who also feel the need to have a voice of reason. One, it's called the bright light, the spotlight, no, the bright light, is it titik terang? So the light at the end of the tunnel, something like that. It talks about like the daily things that are being faced by people during the pandemic. Either it's mental health, either it's caregiving, either it's like the lack of internet, and so on. We also try to, because we realize that a lot of people are facing mixed emotions right now. So we are also contacting our friends who are psychologists, who are mental health practitioners, to also provide assistance in whatever way they can. So we have like a regular program, and people can talk, and people can share their feelings with them. And the other one that we just did, we did a hackathon. It's Hack from Home, focusing on hardware and protocols. A lot of, right now, what we are facing is we receive a lot of mixed messages from our government, because it's not clear, like one government says this and then it says differently on the, so the state government says one thing and then the provincial government says another thing. So it's becoming very confusing for a lot of people. So what we're trying to do is actually, through this hackathon, we try to find ideas where we as citizens, again, can be very independent, can be resilient in our own way, regardless whether the government is there or not, you know, together with us facing this pandemic. So a lot of our programs are now really focusing on citizens' resilience and how they can go through this pandemic and how they can look for a new future to through the alternative thinking. I guess we can explore the rest during the questions and answer sessions.
Great, that's really interesting, Valencia, because you mentioned about various different ways in which you had responded, Kakini has responded towards this pandemic. And I think it's very interesting how, you know, amidst going online, of course, that's probably like the first thing that everybody's thinking about. But how do we, you know, how do we differentiate ourselves amongst all the noise that is happening online? And I think that's really interesting that you decided that you wanted to focus on citizen development. All right, so maybe we can start asking some of the other speakers. Perhaps Natalia, would you maybe like to respond to some of the examples that your hubs have done, maybe in a positive way to respond to this crisis?
Sure. I think, yeah, like we've had our own challenges moving sort of to digital platforms. Like, Many Studios is about physical workspace. It's about bringing people together who want to be part of a community and physically, and to be inspired by one another. And we've got 60 people who use around 45 workspaces, and they come from all different kinds of creative disciplines. And for us, that's about bringing as many different kinds of practitioners together so they can share. And part of that, a lot of that sharing, is not necessarily about sort of programs or mentorship that's very directed to collaboration. We're not a co-working space. A lot of it is about creating friendships and how friendships can change how you work and change your working day, in fact. So this shift for us has been challenging, and I guess in different ways. We have, I mean, I guess more so for conversation and for checking in with one another, and for also just having conversations about what the hub will look like later, or how people feel comfortable in a space, kind of projecting on to the next couple of months. We've moved on to a Slack community, and that's been really helpful. But I guess it also highlights as well, in our spaces, we have lots of different levels of engagement, lots of different kinds of practitioners who kind of connect in different ways. And I think digitally, we're finding it quite difficult to find ways for everybody to feel comfortable to connect and talk and engage with one another, because it kind of feels like a one-size-fits-all in a way. Although we have seen, lots of innovative ways that people are adapting online and outside of physical spaces. A lot of our peer hubs have responded very quickly in creating digital memberships and digital incentives for continuing to work. Part of the issue, though, as well for us, I mean, we can create a sort of an online community for connection, but the reality is people have been impacted in very specific ways, and a lot of people are not working, have lost a lot of work. And so I guess for us, it's much more about creating a community at this point that's just to support one another and not necessarily professionally. And that, I think, has been particularly beneficial for me and hopefully for some of our community members as well. And I think that's, that's definitely a positive outcome. And again, it's something that I hope that we continue to do, is to check in on one another, even if we're back in the building, and kind of continue to work in the ways that. Yeah, I mean, I guess more widely though, we've seen, I mean, within our peer networks or our hub networks across Europe specifically, we've seen an incredible response to adapting the resources that hubs do have, but using those resources to address a much bigger issues, mostly around the health sector, and to create PPE and to kind of really address the issues that affect us all globally right now. And I think that for me has been very inspiring, and I guess, inspired me to consider how in the future we are going to adapt our model, because it's inevitable. I think a lot of us, the first couple of weeks was definitely about finding solutions that addressed the issues according to the models that we had built over years and are understandably precious about. But I think we have to accept, and I think this is where the resilience will really come into play. We need to accept that our models need to change, and I think it's very daunting for a lot of us. But again, I think that's where this connectivity and maybe a new or renewed sense of collaboration is going to be very beneficial. I think for us, it's been so much about being open, and I think there's a lot of great examples of new ways of working and sort of digital engagement and building communities digitally. But I think there's a risk of applying models that don't necessarily suit your community. And I guess my concern is that we might end up with a lot of sort of very quick responses that don't necessarily have sustainable models moving forward. So that's definitely something that we've had in mind, and I think we're fairly small. I mean, we're a small team. We're a very big program in many ways, but we do have it's easy for us to be open and to be close to our community. That's an approach that we've always taken, and I think it really bodes well for us just now, because we get to be creating this sort of new model or adapting very much in conversation with our community. I think that's important.
Thank you, Natalia. And I think that's really interesting how you mentioned one of the roles that your Creative Hub has been doing is creating that friendship network, and how those friendships can grow and benefit from each other. So the fact that by having this situation, this pandemic, it's been very challenging because of that not being able to kind of meet in a physical space, and that online and kind of digital solution might not actually be a very sustainable solution. It might just be maybe like a very short-term response or a very one-off response, but it might not be very sustainable in the future. So I think that's quite interesting, and maybe we might kind of go back to that question again further. But I'd also really like to hear from Stephanie and to see how Penang Art District has been responding to the crisis, and if there's any examples of positive case studies or events or activities that you have done in light of this crisis.
Hi. Yeah, I think just like Natalia and Ellen, the first couple of weeks was really a lot of conversations, a lot of people coming together on digital platforms, using various devices and apps. And it's actually been pretty impressive as to how the engagement has been fairly high from the different communities, and really we managed to connect with people that we haven't previously managed to connect. At least that's a positive thing that came out from the lockdown, that people have time to pause and really think about their work, and also to connect with others within their community that they've never had a chance to meet. But the challenging thing is that a lot of our programs are usually done in person, so we kind of lose a bit of the human connection that we usually get to experience from the different events. But somehow Penang Art District, at least, we try to bring these programs and kind of adapt it to a digital environment. And I'm happy to say that we've gotten positive response from that. The other thing that we were doing in the first couple of weeks was to really figure out ways to find resources to support the arts community. As we know, the arts and culture is one of the majorly hit sector. And it's not only for now, we're going to be in a recovery situation for the next 12 to 18 months. So at the beginning, at the earlier stages, it was to look for resources and support, for emergency support for the community. But as time goes on, I realized that the conversation has also evolved and matured in a way. Higher level conversations were done by different groups of communities to really think about our role of the arts, the role of the arts in society, and also to think about how we can remain relevant, I suppose, in this new normal, and how do we continue to deliver the value of the arts, especially when human connection is currently limited due to the lockdowns and in recovery period. So it's been really inspiring to see how some creatives have come up with ways to support frontliners, and also to support their communities, either by releasing content online, or even having personal conversations. And I've been involved in so many I suppose peer support conversations that have been happening between artists, which I feel like have been very helpful. And also for artists to share their stories and how they cope with the situation online, or even personally between different peers. So I would say that at least for the arts community in Penang and in Malaysia, I've seen a lot of resilience coming out from there, because we operate in a pretty challenging environment in terms of questionable government policies for arts and culture, and the scarcity of resources that are mostly not immediately available for a lot of artists, and not necessarily accessible to different settings. Like, it's mostly available for communities in the urban areas, and the rural areas are sometimes feel disconnected. And especially now, when all our communications are done online, there are communities that feel disconnected and probably don't have direct access to this. But we do see a lot of creatives and artists who have reached out to some of the people by calling and really acknowledging that we do have communities that we need to reach out to. Yeah, so I think it's been fairly positive, and yeah, I'm proud to say that the community is very resilient in dealing with this pandemic so far. And we hope that some policy changes can happen. There's a lot of discussions going on at that end right now, and hopefully from there we'll be able to see some changes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. And it's really interesting to see in your perspective that this pandemic has actually given us also a time for people to maybe pause and reflect about their work and how they connect with others in the community. What you mentioned about how you're kind of looking into your role in the arts and how do you continue to deliver the value of arts when like we lose that kind of human connection, or we don't lose it entirely, but it's quite limited. And I think that's quite interesting for us to maybe revisit again in our own conversations today. So after some of the introductions and insight that we received from the panelists, many of you have also mentioned that, you know, a lot of your business models have changed. A lot of it is due to the fact that, you know, we're not really able to use the physical space anymore. And now you need to kind of go digital. But besides that, are there any areas in your previous work that has changed due to this crisis? Like, for instance, are there new services or offers, or how do you now engage with your audiences in a different way? Does anybody want to start with answering this question?
I'm happy to go ahead. I think for for our creative hub, we do, like, as I mentioned before, we have quite a few different areas of work at many studios. We know that our studio members, they are in the hub. They want to. Their main concern is definitely to still have workspace. So we do need to find solutions to that, and that is definitely our focus. There's elements of our online sort of engagement that we will definitely carry through, because we found that we find quite a different pattern in terms of who's engaging when from being outside the building. So we find that a lot of people who engage well in person don't necessarily engage so much online, or they find it quite overwhelming actually, and that's obviously to do with a saturation generally at the moment. But also those who are a little bit quieter in the hub are engaging a little bit more online. So there's clearly a need to continue to have different ways of bringing the community together. And I think this is another thing that will come out of this and stay with us. But I think in terms of our public engagement, that's going to change a lot, and I think for a long time. So we also have a gallery. My background is in curation, visual arts primarily. So we have a gallery inside the hub, and a lot of our public programming is focused in that space. And we're thinking a lot now about how to present work and how to commission work, and to work with artists in the future. And in the UK, it's still unclear what will restart when. I think, like many places, I think we're all responding to the pandemic and to the virus in ways that are fairly responsive, and they have to be responsive. So there's an indication that galleries and museums, for example, will be the last to reopen. And when they do, I think there'll be different kinds of spaces to what we're used to. So we've working with artists from all over the world. Our program is very international, so again, there's challenges there that we're having to figure out in terms of how we work internationally in lots of different ways. But right now, we're looking at essentially how to show work that doesn't rely on physical space and on the white cube. And we've started to develop a focus on process as opposed to finished work. And I guess this can be applied in lots of different ways. But for example, one of our artists is particularly interested in growing and the relationship between agriculture and history, or gaps in history. So for that project, we're we're focusing on the process of growing as opposed to ever perhaps showing work, and to find ways that we can connect with audiences through that process and through that stage of making work. Similarly, we're developing projects internationally with artists around the radio format. And in some ways, I mean, I think we spoke already, there is challenges to online platforms in terms of connectivity, but also in other ways. So we've actually been thinking about platforms that are offline, although can obviously be accessed online. And the radio platform for us is an interesting one because it's an existing platform, but all of a sudden it's very relevant again, and obviously it can work offline and online. So we're experimenting with not necessarily new platforms, but existing and perhaps even platforms that are not particularly well utilized anymore, and seeing how we can reuse those. So yeah, we're thinking constantly about how audiences will want to and will feel comfortable experiencing work. But in terms of our community in the hub, we do need to find a way to bring that community together again physically, but it'll look different, undoubtedly.
Yeah. And does anybody else maybe want to comment about how it's like for your own hub? Like what else has changed, or where do you see you're interacting differently with your audiences or with your hubs and communities? Maybe Valencia? You're still on mute.
Okay, I hope this works now. So yeah, following up what Natalia was just saying about it's all a process. It's been a process still with us. You know, it's not something that, because we don't know, like we've never been in this situation before. So in terms like, if you ask about business model, it's also something that we're still figuring out as we go. But we've been thinking for a couple of years back, we've been thinking about a different ownership of the space. So we've talked a lot about having a co-ownership of the space, you know, so then it doesn't just having like this conventional business model where the space owns by somebody and then we pay the rent and then, you know, and then it's just like that all the time. But then we wanted to think about like whether we can see it differently, because the physical space and whatever it's in it, is it possible for people to co-own that in a way that also creating a more sustainable, how do you call it, a more sustainable way for the space to live? Because at this moment, if it runs like the way as it is, we sort of like it's our own responsibility. But if we own it and people still think that the place is relevant and they need the space, then we can ask, you know, everybody to think together on how to save the space. So relevance have been very much in our conversation, how we can stay relevant, not just before, but also in this time and then afterwards, maybe after everything is open again. That's the second. And the third one is the online space, the virtual space have actually helped us to expand our audience. Because a lot of apparently we found out that with a lot of our virtual discussions, like the Obrolan Warga, the citizen talk, we managed to get people from different parts of Indonesia all the way to Bau-Bau, to Maluku, which is like in the eastern part of Indonesia. It's 4 hours flight, just to provide comparison to those who are not familiar with Indonesia. So this has been very interesting, and this is something that we've been looking into, how we can reach more people outside of our physical space, because before it was mostly people from Jakarta or people who happen to come from Jakarta, our friends, our community friends, artists from outside of Jakarta who happen to be in town, and then they access the space. But now the space can be accessible to anyone. And also this made us think about new way of doing our program, like the combination of like, oh, actually this online thing could be something that we continue to do, because before it was we almost don't have any online activity apart from social media. But now, because most of our activities are online, so then yeah, we can reach more people. And the other thing is actually it allows us, because we need to slow down, and we cannot do anything because of the situation. It allows us to reflect more on what is it that we want to do in the future. So the things that we've been talking about 2 years ago, it's like it's being sped up. So we need to think about our relevance even more. So yeah, we sort of like, it's a blessing in disguise because now it's becoming more and more focused on our role. We wanted to be more playing the hub role more in a way that we are connecting the two different worlds, between the development world, because a lot of us have that background on that world, and to the general audience who might not be familiar with certain issues or things that are talked about in the development world. So the things that we thought is important, we try to communicate it. So we find a way to actually, it's more, how do you call it? Yeah, easier to receive by people, because a lot of times when we talk about issues in the development world, it's too heavy and too conceptual in time. So then, yeah, people couldn't understand. So we are now figuring way out to actually bring some of this like really important thinking out there. I guess, yeah, I guess that's that's from me.
Thanks, Valencia. Yes, you mentioned that like with going online, one of the in a way it's a blessing in disguise, because that actually allows you to reach out to a wider audience, where people who used to go to Kokini would only be people who are like within the physical, near the physical space. So like people maybe who are in Jakarta, but now by going online, you can actually reach a larger audience and get people from other cities and other places to also join. And you also kind of bridge that gap between the general audiences, because you can actually help share wider topics that these general audiences may not actually have access to. But I think it's also interesting. I think it was also Natalia that mentioned in the earlier part of the session that even though we're trying to go online, there's also still a gap, and the issue still lies that many of the infrastructure is still not really accessible and inclusive for some people. So I think that's maybe something that we should kind of think about while we continue the conversation. So Stephanie, and in terms of Penang Art District, is there any other specific changes in your maybe business model or products or the services that you offer, or the ways that you engage with your community or your audience?
So the way we operate hasn't really changed that as much, because our role has always been a connecting role with resources and with capacity building opportunities. So that hasn't changed as much, but it has become more crucial, I suppose, right now, to be able to provide that support to a wider community than the community we initially served, because as of now, the need has obviously increased due to this crisis. But responding to what Natalia and Ellen shared regarding, putting out content online and reaching out to the audience, I'd just like to bring up that one other challenge that we face in Malaysia, at least, is the language. Because our social media platforms are currently limited to Facebook and Instagram, and as you know, all these are curated and with algorithm. So unlike the physical events, we do meet people from different walks of life and perhaps different communities who speak different languages. But right now, when you put it up on a digital platform, we tend to only see the content that we usually subscribe to, and that includes the languages that we're used to. So it's an added challenge to connect different communities who put up their content and with different languages. That's an added challenge, which we are trying to, as a connector, we're trying to figure out how to bring these different groups together for them to not only connect with each other, but also for them to connect with their different audiences, either multidisciplinary groups or groups from who use different languages to produce their work. So we're in the works of creating an online platform to enable this kind of exchange. But developing technological platforms, it's very expensive, that we've come to realize. And also, it's a long-term investment. It's not only to deal with the pandemic now, but if anything, the pandemic has really showed us the importance of having this online presence, because as traveling will be restricted, the opportunities to basically connect with the global community will be more challenging. So we're trying to figure out ways to enable this for our different groups and communities, and also trying to look for resources to help them, I suppose, catch up to speed with some of these technology that would enable them to be able to connect with the outside world. So yeah, a lot more collaborations have come up, a lot more opportunities, and yeah, we're fairly excited as to how where this could lead to in the next couple of months, and also I think in the years to come.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Many of you also mentioned, like what Stephanie just said, there's lots of opportunities for collaboration. There's lots of interesting opportunities that have come up that maybe has not yet been explored further. But when we think about resilience for your hubs, and I think many of you have also mentioned the word resilient and being resilient and keeping resilient during these times. What does that actually mean in the sense that how do you as a hub leader, or how do you support your community in staying afloat or being resilient? What are some examples maybe that you can share in terms of this resilience? Natalia, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think resilience, so the idea of resilience, I think, like many other aspects of working through this pandemic, it changes constantly for me, I think, and it changes with every different phase, I think, or hurdle. I think that's kind of, it feels there's a bit of a rhythm where I feel like we're kind of getting over one hurdle and then onto the next and onto the next, and that idea of resilience continues to change for me, and it means different things. I think at certain points it's been as simple as staying hopeful. I think for me that's something that it's been important to kind of instill for myself, to kind of keep the community together, and to keep things afloat, but yeah, also individually with different members, and we've been doing that in a practical sense in different ways. So a lot of the first, I'd said before, the first few weeks for me were very much about addressing the primary need, and that was to allow people to stop paying rent. That was it was quite clear from our community that was their main concern was financial. So we, in the first after the first 3 weeks, we managed to get 2 grants, which accounted for a few months of rent relief, and then after that period, we were able to spend much more time addressing maybe more specific needs of the community, and resilience meant different things for different sectors. So we have, as I'd said before, a lot of different kinds of practices in our spaces, from a lot of visual arts practices to design, theatre, architecture, tech, curation, writing. So resilience meant different things to different sectors as well, and different sectors have been hit harder than others. So we spend, a lot of my time has been spent quite simply finding funding streams that are specific to different practices and different people, and spending time writing applications for people. So a lot of our, I mean, fundraising is something that I do a lot in different parts of my career. But for a lot of our studio members, it's not something they're familiar with. So again, it's another skill you have to learn quite quickly. And considering, I mean, the financial impact is, for me, as far as I can see, been one of the biggest or sort of more concerning issues, and the issue that's hitting people's sort of mental health as well, quite considerably. So a lot of time's been spent writing applications, finding connections, in some senses finding work. So we've built, I mean, there's been a lot of and fantastic responses from different sort of umbrella organisations across the UK and Scotland as well, specifically. But a lot of information to distill for people, and I think at a time where people are very overwhelmed already, I guess a lot of our role are about distilling that information to individuals. So we've created different toolkits that's specific to our community and also specific to people as well. And I guess so resilience for us is, I think, it's been about finding ways to support one another. And I guess from Many Studios' perspective, finding ways to support individual community members. And that's still definitely the phase that we're in. I think things are shifting a little bit now, and I think as an organisation, I think Ellen kind of touched on this a little bit, and Stephanie as well. I think actually I think the way that our government and policy responds to the pandemic is going to be a very important element of sustainability and rebuilding for a lot of our creative hubs and a lot of our creative hub members. So we're working with a couple of umbrella organisations in Scotland who are talking to the government and just trying to make sure that our voices are heard. I think some of I mean, this is something again that the creative industries are really used to, which is, I guess, a general misunderstanding of what we do. And that kind of, I think it's fairly usual that we are kind of overlooked in some ways, or that there is a lot of grey area around where we sit within wider policies. And so right now it's important for me to make sure that there's quite a clear understanding of what we need moving forwards in very sort of practical ways or specific sense. A lot of conversation, of course, is allowed around physical distancing. There's been quite casual references to you know, reducing the capacity of some spaces by, you know, 2/3 or more, and that, I mean, that's not a flippant. That shouldn't be flippant. That completely changes a model, a business model, and I think nobody can survive that. I would be surprised anyway. So we're trying to make sure that policy is considering the capacity of different creative organisations and creative communities. So resilience for us right now is about having our voice heard and for staying hopeful, I think, more than anything else, because I think there's a lot more to come.
Yeah. And you mentioned that one of the kind of main things that you guys needed to focus on resilience was also the financial models. And I think in this panel, we've got 3 very different hubs who maybe in terms of financial models are also quite different. I mean, I think Many Studios and maybe Kekini itself is very much like a privately funded space, and as well as with Many Studios, it's quite possible for you to also look at opportunities for funding. And with Penang Art District, I think it's more of, is it a state-supported space?
Yeah, we're just,
yeah.
Yep.
So it would be interesting to see how that might be different for each space, and you know, by having those different financial models. So maybe we can hear a little bit from Stephanie as well about how that kind of works with how do you as a space stay resilient, but having that kind of still having that opportunity to maybe be supported by the government and so on.
Yeah, I'd say we've been pretty lucky in the sense that because we are directly supported by the state government, but which is why we found ourselves in a very important position to advocate for the communities that are not as lucky. So a lot of our work in the past couple of weeks have been to appeal to local government and also appeal to the federal government to support the arts, either in way of funding or in a way of providing infrastructure for communities to be able to connect on digital platforms. It's not been easy because as of now in this pandemic, there are lots of different sectors who are, you know, fighting for resources. So even in the art sector, we do experience budget cuts, and we have to brainstorm creative ways to adapt our programs to ensure they are cost efficient but still deliver the value that we want to deliver to our communities. So that has been challenging. But if anything, I've learned about resilience is really reaching out for collaborations and letting people know that you need help, and you'd be surprised by the number of people who would actually come up and to offer their support. While of course we acknowledge that everyone is having difficulties in paying rent and in surviving, but I think resilience, I feel, in terms of coming together and being resilient together would help with the challenge. At least that's what we learned in the last couple of weeks.
And how about you, Valencia, for Kekini? You're still on mute.
Okay, so a lot of the things have been put out by Natalia and Stephanie very clearly. We share the same situation as well. But when we decided to close, we were one of the first co-working or creative hubs to close actually in Jakarta because we just didn't want to take the risk. And knowing, basically, we did a lot of research on how this virus is going, and then like all the development that comes with it, because it seems that it keeps changing every week. So then we really pay a lot of attention to it. So then we decided to close already on March 15th, and we know already in the first 2 weeks that it's not gonna open until at least July. But then at the end of March and the beginning of April, with the way the virus is going around the world, we know that probably this will continue to happen until the end of the year. And then the second one, even though what we know as well, I mean, for us, even though that things might be opening soon, there's still going to be like a strict social distancing applied if we want to not contributing to spreading the virus. So knowing this early allow us actually to make peace with ourselves, and to allow us to sit back and reflect on how we are going to survive until the end of the year. So that's one. The second one, but the first one, it makes us also look at our finances in the very beginning, like how long can we survive without having income? What do we need to do so? Because we don't want to fire people because of that. We don't want to lay off people because that's not what, it's not in line with our vision. But at the same time, we're also thinking on how we can, still work together as a team for as long as we can, as long as our finances allow. Second is looking at the mental health of the team is very important for us. So Resilient has been that also for us because a lot of things are not used again working digitally. So supporting them and also knowing that knowing from very early on that productivity is not going to be the way it used to be before, even though you're working from home. But we know that there are a lot of challenges also coming from home that could put another pressure or a different pressure to the team. So we've been quite open about it. Try to create like a support system. Like if you cannot work for whatever reason, just tell us and then let us know how we can support each other. That's why I found that the open source community system, it's really working for us, because then it allows us one person could not do their work, the other can just jump in and then fill in and help each other and support each other. So that's the second. For what's after this, it's still in conversation, because we also realize the services that we have with the space, with the physical space, like Natalia said, it's going to reduce like maybe 75%, because if we follow a strict physical distancing, within the range of 2.4 meter, there can only be 2 people, and we're quite a small space, and we're only like 60 to 90 meters in each floor. And we're also located in an old building, so it's not as easy for us to renovate the building to make sure that we have like better ventilation, so then there is less risk for people when they start working when it's open. So that's one thing that we still haven't figured out. We also still don't know, like, because changing like all this office stuff to suit the protocol that is needed to prevent the spread of the virus is also, it takes a new investment, which at the moment we're not ready with, but we are looking into it. So we're calculating everything basically now, and we have time maybe in the next 2 or 3 months to finalize everything, and then hopefully by that time we can already figure out a way to find a new model that allows us to generate income, uh, because we are not supported by funding or donors, or I can't even mention, not the state. I don't think there's any co-working in Indonesia. Well, most are like privately owned, so a lot of them are not supported by the state. And this is the same situation with a lot of co-working spaces in Indonesia, because co-working spaces in Indonesia, um, a lot of them are actually established not just as a physical working space, but also as an extension of the passion or the dream or the vision of the co-founders. So if they want, a lot of them wanted to develop, startup communities, startup ecosystem, tech communities, or maker communities, or in Kekini with social innovations. And then it's been challenging because it's also something new. It still needs to, prove themselves to people in the past 2 or 3 years, but on the way to do that, and then this hit. So yeah, it's I think resilient also mean a lot of reflection time for us, but a reflection time that we cannot dwell on too long, because yeah, in reality, finances will not allow us to dwell on too long, but it pushes us also to think hard, to be innovative ourselves on figuring out the way to get out of this.
Okay, thank you so much for your insights so far. I actually still have many questions, but I see that the chat box has been running wild lately. So I think we should start picking up some of the questions from there. So the team has helped me select some questions. And one of the things that I wanted to maybe pull out for our panelists is another question around the business models. So there was a question that asked, do we need to reroute our hub's goal in this confusing situation? As an example, if our community actually has been trying to fulfill secondary need of people, such as happiness, do we need to move away and try to fulfill the primary need of people? So I think this is maybe also talking about your kind of hub's identity in a way. Would anyone like to try and answer? Maybe Valencia?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about this, but we don't put it in primary or secondary needs. So what the situation lead us to is actually thinking what is essential to people. So the essentials now are health. So a lot of the things that are related to health sector, food. So security and food sovereignty becomes important, and other essential things that includes mental health. We've been talking about this, but before, I think we're still distracted because there's so many opportunities. There's so many things that we can do. There's so many collaborators that look that like it's so cool to collaborate with them. But actually, this situation for us, it means that we are refocusing ourselves to do the things that are essential. Essential also in the sense that it will always be needed by people. So it's not gonna go just because people are bored with it, or there is a new trend, or we are out. How do you call it? Yeah, we are out promoted by somebody. So that's why now there are a lot of our work is actually focusing on citizen resilience, a contribution to the betterment of citizens' life. Yeah.
All right. Maybe Natalia or Stephanie would also like to comment on this one.
As a hub, we've not really thought about like the general essential needs of the general public just yet, but on an individual level, we have artists, we have discussions with artists, and artists have, few artists have brought this up and kind of questioned our role as art practitioners. How do we channel our creativity in helping to provide essential services, either in terms of awareness or either in terms of emotional support, or even down to any labor skills that are required to help the betterment, I suppose, what Ellen said, the betterment of the society. So it's that conversation has been more on an individual level rather than on the hub level for us. So, but it's something to think about as a hub, how we can support, I suppose, that role in providing more resources for essential needs.
Natalie, do you want to comment as well? Sorry, Natalie. I think Natalia, we can't hear you very well.
Okay. I'm not on mute, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think for us it's the same as Stephanie has outlined. I think within the capacity of our organisation and our skill set and our knowledge base, for us, our focus, as I've kind of already said, is on the sustainability of the sector, which is not really any different from any other time. I think so many studios is one of the few sort of non-publicly funded organisations in terms of relying on core funding from the government or via the government. So we did set out from 2012 to demonstrate that it was possible, or to figure out first that it was possible to have a sustainable creative business in Scotland or in the UK. So I guess, yeah, part of that work has always been about trying to build sustainability in the creative sector. A lot of our consultancy is around kind of sustainable creative business models. So I guess it's continuing to work in that same way. As I mentioned before, we're in conversation. We have a couple of organisations in Scotland that are umbrella, like Scottish Contemporary Art Network, Creative Scotland, which is connected to the government in some ways, in many ways. So we're always in close conversation with these organisations, specifically around how policy has been built, and specifically right now being built in response to the pandemic. So yeah, I guess it's to try and to use as much of our capacity and connections and networks to make sure that yeah, our sector is being considered within policy and moving forward.
Sorry again. I've just muted myself and unmuted myself again. So thank you so much for answering those questions. Another question that we had from the floor was actually about government support. So I think many of you had mentioned a bit about the government support for creative hubs, but I think many of the participants would like to understand what exactly are the support given by the government for these creative hubs in your respective countries, and where can these be innovated? Maybe we can start with Stephanie.
Sure. Well, in my environment, it's two levels. One is it's a state government and the federal government. The challenge that we have in terms of government policy formulation, and also in Penang in particular, is that the arts and culture sector is always coupled with tourism. So there's been sort of like a conflict between the two different sectors constantly for resources. So we often find that we're at the losing end coupled with the tourism sector. So there has been resources available that has been made available by both federal and state government, but they've been more emergency aid, short-term support. And I think what is expected from the community is really a longer-term plan, a plan that could help develop the sector, not just to survive the pandemic, but also to grow post-pandemic. And these includes like infrastructural support and also education and development support that at the moment is not available. That's really something that we're advocating for at the moment.
Shall I talk to the UK? I mean, I think UK wide is probably makes more sense at the moment. So yeah, we have, like I'd said before, we're not core funded publicly, but we have, in terms of this response to the pandemic, we've accessed government funding. So and similarly, it's emergency funding. The Scottish Government and the UK Government have a few different schemes that address different areas of emergency. One of them is the furlough scheme, which is to cover the salaries of workers up to 80%. We have utilised that scheme as well. So we have one member of staff that's not part of our directorial team. She's our community manager, community coordinator, who's currently on furlough. And that scheme is actually fairly long term in terms of the support that's been available through the government. This is one of the kind of the longer standing schemes. It takes us up to October, although around July, by the end of July, it changes slightly, and organisations or businesses are expected to pay some of that scheme. In terms of small creative organisations, that is likely to become unrealistic. So in that sense, it's to July. And then there's been a couple of different kind of grant programs, but these are quite specific actually. So again, they're quite difficult to access in some ways. One of them is very specific to buildings, which in a sense should be very useful for creative hubs, a lot of physical creative hubs, but it's not been quite as simple as that. And we found that the majority of creative organisations in Scotland have struggled to access that grant. It's related to business rates and building rates, but not all. I mean, we all have very different setups, as is the case everywhere, and not all creative hubs are leaseholders or kind of have a certain level of responsibility that they could access that. So that was a fairly, as far as we can tell, it was not particularly well utilised within the creative sector, but that has hopefully changed more recently. There's other grants that are via the government, but kind of more directed through other bodies, social enterprise bodies, and those again are emergency funds, so it's around resilience. I'd say the grants that were kind of, the most support was kind of taking people to three to 4 months. And that for us is kind of, taking us up to July. Beyond that point, we're now trying to figure out what support is there for the next phase to rebuild.
I guess for Indonesia, we don't have specific support for the creative hubs or creative spaces. So a lot of our government support are focusing on public in general, so people who are hit the hardest through a lot of schemes, like schemes of how do you call it, like cash. So there's a direct cash given by the government. Also, there's help in terms of staple foods. And in the creative sector, some of the ministers, Minister of Education and Culture, Minister of Creative Economy and Tourism, they've opened up funding for artists, so then they can apply. So some of the artists also receive staple food in some areas, and they try to create programs where artists could do their work, and then they got paid because of joining that program. But it's still a very small scale. I mean, considering we are 250 million people, and there's so many artists, of course, and creative people. So it doesn't really it reach only like a small scale of the community. And the other thing is we have like tax relaxation, but it's again for a lot of the industries that are what they call the essential industries, including manufacturing industries and so on, but not so much with the creative hub, because it's also this is something new. Co-working spaces in Indonesia and Creative Hub are developing only in the past 4 years, 5 years, 2015, 2016, and it starts booming in 2017 and 18. So they couldn't really place us where we are in terms of our role. Is it just another office? Is it just like renting offices? So then the strategic role of co-working spaces, we still need to do a lot of campaign for that to the state government and to our own local government. But there are opportunities sometimes with some of the co-working spaces or the creative hubs who are directly working with the government, those who are in response to the situation. For example, they do programs because our government might not be so savvy in doing online program or in doing online content. So they are working with several, with some, but very few co-working spaces that manages also to work together with the government, because it's also not easy working with the government, and you have to still follow, you know, a series of bureaucracy that allows you to access that project. And like I said, because this is a new industry, so a lot of us are actually coming from the private sector or the development sector. We are not used to, you know, join the tender project when we want to access government money. So that's still a challenge. Yeah. So and then for many of the co-working spaces, they do depend a lot on changing their business model, trying to figure out a way where at least they have a cash flow, and not necessarily profit, but something to just keep them going until they are allowed to open again. But even so, with the opening, we still have some challenges with the protocols, which at this moment we have no clear protocols yet. I mean, there has been one protocol that has been released by our health ministers, but it doesn't. It's not yet. It needs to be more specific into, you know, each industry. So it needs to be modified more. So we are now also talking to some people, architect friends, also to figure out on how to modify the general protocols that are given by health ministry.
Great, thank you so much, Valencia. We have one more opportunity for questions, and I'd like to invite those who maybe want to go live with their question to use the raise hand function. And I see that there is one raised hand from Rizky Ramadan. Rizky, would you like to ask the question on live? We can unmute you.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Rizky. Can you try again? Please also mention your organization or your hub.
All right. Hi. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
All right. Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, and I think a good evening of some of you guys. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rizky Ramadan, or everyone call me Iki. I am the program and the community manager from Block 71, Bandung, Indonesia. So it's been, first of all, thank you very much for giving me the chances to being live and asking the question. And of course, I actually already put the question on the chat box, but maybe it's already been too much of the question. So let me ask you all. So I saw this pandemic or this situation as this 2 months is actually, we need to see it as a positive vibe. I mean, even though there's a lot of things that happen, but I think we need to see this on the side of a positive thing. So one thing that we've been doing over in my communities, because we are specialized in tech hub, especially for the tech startups. So we're thinking about, I know it's being hard to connect with all the platform, all the digitals, not everyone that maybe understand and also can learn fast about these new things that happens in our life, especially with the digitalized. But we saw, me and my team, like we saw there's a chance, a glimpse of chance that actually can, maybe it's opportunity that can connect with everyone in the world, like really, literally everyone in the world. Like this event is actually being connected for UK, Penang, and then Jakarta, right? It's really great, right? So what I want to ask you all is there opportunities that if we are building, or let's say if we are collaborating and build of online communities or online platform that actually maybe government can help or can support, or even though it's not being supported by government, but but if we raise together for fundraising, or but even for me, right, me and my communities, we already say that if we need to build the platform, we want to build the platform. But let me ask you guys, are you willing to join if you know there's online communities that can connect, especially connect and help each other, especially for, like I heard the one that looking maybe for opportunities for work, for the community to grow, to get connection. Is there any of you guys that interest about that, things like this? I guess that's my question. Thanks.
So the question was about setting up an online community for connections and to enable kind of mutual growth and learning. Does anybody want to answer?
Yeah, if I can mention, actually, Penang Art District is looking at setting up a platform exactly like what Rizky has mentioned. But then based on our capacity, we're setting up one that is specifically for Penang practitioners. But the next step from there is, of course, to look at how we can, connect nationally and then regionally. But yeah, it'd be great to have some people who have experience in tech to kind of help us figure out how we can do this cross platforms, because I'm sure each hub or each city or country would want to have their own platform, but also how do you then connect platforms onto one big international community? And I think British Council Malaysia as well is looking at setting up a website for creative hubs. And I think with all these platforms coming up, it'll be very helpful to have a wider platform that can connect all of us. Yeah.
Can I just mention? I mean, I guess there's like you kind of pointed out, there's going to be localized and sort of national and international needs and sort of reasons to connect. We're part of a Creative Hub network called European Creative Hub Network, which was originally set up by the British Council as part of their Hubs programme. And after 2 years, that support or that program kind of came to an end, and it is transformed into a hub-led network. And we've kind of came in and out of this network, but definitely found in the last few weeks that it's been completely transformed how we've problem solved in terms of having those connections between different spaces, and actually the different contexts across Europe has really helped us to find ways of innovating and connecting. So I mean, I would definitely advocate for that, for kind of continental network that's been really beneficial to us. And perhaps, I mean, there are a lot of existing formal networks and informal networks, so maybe it's about identifying kind of those existing ones and then finding a way, like you say, to connect them in a sort of overarching way.
I would just like to add to Natalia and Stephanie. It would be also a good idea if within this platform that you can, it's like in Slack, that you can find like channels where you can really support each other based on the things that you would really like to know. For example, I joined this, since a month ago, I joined this international group. It's called Open COVID-19 in Facebook. It's a pretty amazing group because it's online, it's on Facebook, but it connects everyone from different parts of the world who are contributing to any initiative that they can do within their reach to create something. So from like a local home mask to like a professional ventilator. ventilating system for the patients. It's quite amazing with that platform alone. With this is, Facebook page, we sometimes overlook how they manage to gather everyone, and also to, at the same time, not just connecting the professionals with the amateurs, because what happened there, it's like this is normal, of course, from in the maker community, where you put a problem and then everybody is just like jumping into trying to help you and then give you suggestions on how to improve your work. So this is the kind of spirit that we can actually borrow and replicate within the creative community, because a lot of times it doesn't happen that way. But I find this like it's really interesting, and also how they help, for example, creating like specific channels. So if you are, but this is just an illustration. For example, if you are working on facial, like these are the different kinds of facial that is out there. So if you want to know how to improve your facial, this is what resource that you can have, instead of like everybody coming together, and then a lot of times if it's not focused, it's not channeled, then the conversation would just like evaporate, because we are very excited in the beginning, but as soon as we find like it's not very relevant, then we just pull out. Well, actually it's very important for us to be consistent and to stay together so we can support each other also.
Great. Thank you so much for the question, Rizky, and to the panelists. I have one more question, which I think would be kind of closing this, the Q&A part of our conversation, which is talking about the future. So previously, one of the one of the participants have actually asked about what are the kind of business models that you need to look into in order to avoid maybe the future pandemics. But when we're also talking about the future, we'd also really like to know, for your creative hubs, what exactly is, how do you actually feel about the future? How do you think the wider creative landscape will change after COVID-19? Is that a very far-fetched question?
Should I go first?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. For us, yeah, it's also something that we have to, it's being fast forwarded for us, thinking about this business model. Because we've been looking into, in the past 2 years, we've been looking into cooperatives, we've been looking into co-ownership. And then we found actually after the situation, the only way that we could survive and also stay relevant is if we have a space that is co-owned by the community. So by everyone who might have who feels like they can connect with us and who can do things together with us. Yeah, we're looking into this co-ownership. Actually, now we are connecting with an institution from the UK, with Fair Shares Institution, and also with Loco Soko. It's an organization working on creating business models for social businesses. We've been talking to them like, how can we make it into reality if we want to have a hub that is sustainable, but we can do it in a co-ownership way. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Valencia. And maybe Natalia or Stephanie would also like to comment on this briefly.
I'm happy to go first. That's all right. Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily know, and I think that that's also okay. I think that, again, this is unprecedented, as is consistently said. So we're responding, and I think, well, we're definitely in a period of trying to at least change physically the spaces so that they are safer and that people feel safer within them. I think in terms of I think there's still a lot that we kind of that we're still to figure out, and I think that's okay. And again, like I've said, for us, it's really about conversation and being open, and to make sure that we're, however things change and however a model change or services change or relationships change, that they are in conversation with other people and what they need to feel comfortable. I guess more specifically, it's definitely going to be more spread out. I think we know that, and we can prepare for that already. But yeah, I guess, I mean, I think what I've kind of mentioned earlier, this kind of, I mean, for us anyway, I know that other organisations and hubs have probably had very collaborative and collective operations. For a lot of us in the UK anyway, we're always kind of complaining that we're also busy, we're very under-resourced, and I mean, our organisations are incredibly ambitious for the small teams that we have often. And we're not always getting to go to events that other kind of peer hubs are doing, or organisations. I think there's been a real transformation in that sense, in terms of finding time to connect and reconnect, and then also to collaborate. And I mean, it's came up in every conversation I've had, including this conversation, in terms of formalising networks. And clearly there's a need to connect. And I hope that that's also what the future looks like. I mean, for us, we're already building new partnerships, even without out with the hub sector and out with sort of an immediate response to the pandemic, but collaborations across different areas of our programming, and I think for me that's really exciting. It's particularly exciting, I think, for me because, again, for small teams, there's a bit of an isolation. I mean, I have, as I've mentioned before, until last year, it was just there's 3 directors at many studios and just one myself as a member of staff who operates the space and strategizes on a day-to-day basis, and that can be quite isolating. And without those connections with other spaces and other organizations and people, it can be quite difficult to I guess to build momentum in many ways. So I hope that that's definitely something that that's sort of solidified in the future.
And Stephanie?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Natalia in terms of collaboration is definitely the future. It was even before the pandemic happened that collaboration is very important. But also I see a need to be open to adapting. In our context right now, we're under a conditional movement control order. Means that the lockdown is starting to open up and we're starting to allow different businesses to operate. And right now, arts and cultural spaces, some arts and cultural spaces are allowed to operate business as usual, but with, of course, social distancing guidelines. But I realized that there is an instant reaction to want to go back to the old way of doing things, to go back to normal, to wait for everything to go back to the way it is, especially, for example, in performing arts and theater, that we need to allow audiences to come in again to survive. But I think moving forward, I think we also need to think about ways to adapt to the situation and see how, even with the social distancing guideline, with those limitations, how we can find different ways to change the way our operations work, and how we can collaborate with people from different sectors as well, like from the technology, from tech sector, to support, I guess, the arts and culture sector that may not be as tech savvy before. So I would say collaboration, but adaptation as well is a way moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that has been a really, really interesting insight, and we've been having a really great discussion so far, but unfortunately we may need to come to an end as we have about 13 minutes left from our 2 hours. So I'd like to actually summarize some of the key points that we've had throughout this whole conversation. I think many of the short-term responses that we've heard from the various different hubs were focused on the immediate needs. So for instance, finance, business model, going online. There has been many positive examples of resilience and these examples of responding to the pandemic from their hubs and the communities. So for instance, many artists were looking at creative solutions to help the frontliners. But hubs have also been very much focused on the mental well-being of their community. And I think that's also very important because being part of the hub is also about the relationships that you forge with those people in your community. I think this is arguably beyond their responsibility, but it proves to be amazing. And being able to adapt and shift the purpose of it, which is very, very positive. On the innovation side, not only for the tech options, but there was also some discussions about, citizen development, how do you engage with your society better? But a lot of these things might not actually translate well when we talk about online, because there's still a lot of challenges with going online. You need to be able to compete with the noise. You need to find your niche, and I think it's quite interesting what Valencia was talking about in terms of finding that niche. And in her case, it's about the citizen development side of things. And the pros and cons actually of going digital is also the accessibility, because on one hand, you are able to reach a wider audience, but it's not necessarily those who might have the same tech infrastructure. So how do you actually address the issues of inclusion with going online? There's also a discussion around behavioral change, so the power of the culture, of people demonstrating to support each other, not just professionally, but also at a personal level. We also talked about the government's role, like how can governments better support creative hubs during this time? How can we access different support from the government? But it's also a good opportunity to use this time to reflect on our role in the society and how arts can provide better value. And then we talked about the future, and it's very important for a healthy ecosystem to ensure resilience as well as sustainability. There was talk about the word, of course, collaboration, which is even before the pandemic itself has always been important. But I think after the pandemic, it seems to be one of the best ways for us to stay afloat and keep resilient is actually to forge new collaborations. Of course, there was also a really good suggestion to maybe look to develop maybe an online platform to connect with other communities and hubs, so that this community and this network of hubs can learn and grow together amidst this current situation. But also, as the lockdown opens up, there's an immediate and instant reaction to go back to normal. But we all know that going back to normal will take some time, and we need to adapt and find different ways to operate and to work and collaborate with other fields such as tech or other creative sectors, in order for us to be able to fill in the gaps of skills and trainings that the hubs needs. So that was my very short and brief summary of this discussion, but I think the team will be setting up and compiling more data and insight from today's discussion that we can then share with you. So this has summed up our session today, but before we come to a close, I'd actually like to share some information about what's coming up. So may I ask help from Mark to bring up the slides again?
Yep, I'm sharing now. Sorry, it's taking a while to load.
It's all right. All right, so what's actually happening next? As I mentioned, our team will be compiling some of the insights from today's session, and we'll be following up with you on a post-event survey. We'll also be sharing some links to resources that we feel would be very helpful for your hubs, and also maybe cross-reference some of the items and resources that was discussed today as well. Our team will then be actually organizing the next forum on Thursday, 25th of June at the same time. So in this session, we will go beyond and start looking at medium-term responses of creative hubs during this pandemic and the ways in which the hubs are undergoing transformation. So more specifically on digital transformation and how to increase impact through digital engagement. So please look out for those announcements and also to register again for that session. If you're interested to learn more about our programs, you can also follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletters. And if you had taken any photos or any tweets you'd like to tag and mention us, then that would also be great. These are our social media handles. And once again, thank you so much for attending and participating in this first session. To the panelists and to the speakers, thank you so much for your time and your willingness to share your experiences. We hope you found it useful, and we hope you found it insightful, and that you all can continue to join us on this journey for the next 2 months. So one last request before all of us logs off. We are trying to see if we can get in a group photo. This is optional, so if you don't want to turn on your video, you don't have to. But for those who do want to, maybe we can try and